benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. If you want to learn more about this land acknowledgement as well as our responsibility, please visit this website here that's listed at the bottom of the slide. I also wanted to acknowledge the Green Initiative Fund, who is here today and also funding us in this summit as well as today's event, so I wanted to thank them. So now I'm going to invite Lauren and Ananya, who are our Vice President and President of our chapter of Project RISHI, to speak a little bit more about Project RISHI. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. So we just wanted to tell you a little bit about Project RISHI. So Project RISHI stands for Rural India Social and Health Improvement. It's a national student-run organization, and we have 18 chapters across the United States.
Yeah, so the UC Berkeley chapter originally joined the UCLA's efforts in 2007, and in 2012 we were able to move to our own village in northern India called Baneri, where we have worked ever since.
Yeah, and our chapter specifically does work in various sectors, including agriculture, sanitation, education, women's empowerment, and health. And yeah, with that, thank you so much again for being here, and we'll just hand it off.
Yeah, and if you also want to take a look at our mission, we didn't say it out loud, but you can read up there.
Thank you, Lauren and Ananya. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about our project group, which is the Rainwater Harvesting Project Group, which started in 2017 after a survey of villagers revealed that there was a large lack of water access during the long dry seasons. So since then, we have been working alongside the villagers to implement sustainable rainwater harvesting systems that will increase their accessibility to water for agricultural purposes. So, inspired by our experiences during the rainwater harvesting project, we have experienced many obstacles, and we wanted to bring together Berkeley students, researchers, and professionals in the field to explore and advance conversations about what sustainable development looks like in different sectors across the world. Understanding that the issues surrounding development work can often feel very overwhelming, we're hoping to create this space here today by inviting students and experts to discuss these complex challenges and create solutions moving forward. So without further ado, we are very excited to present to you all our amazing panelists here today who will be talking more about their work in sustainable development. So our panelists will each give an overview of their work, followed by a few curated questions, and then they will receive live questions from all of you. So we have here with us today Dr. Isha Ray, Mr. George Scharfenberger, Dr. Clara Griffiths, and Dr. David Allen. So first we have Dr. Isha Ray. She is an associate professor in the Energy and Resources Group. In addition, she is the co-director at the Berkeley Water Center, a faculty member at UC Berkeley UCSF Joint Medical Program, and a faculty member at the Institute for South Asia Studies at Cal. Please welcome Dr. Isha Ray. Just press it. Yeah. It's not showing on my screen.
No, unfortunately.
I usually do not like looking back. Remember Orpheus, it did no good, but it seems I have no choice. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you. I've known Project RISHI for many years. I had several cohorts of students come by and dump in my doors during office hours, seeking advice and counsel, and I've always been very impressed by their tireless efforts and their enthusiasm and their knowledge. So it's a pleasure to be here today, along with the rest of my distinguished colleagues, of course. So I want to just very briefly give an overview of kind of where I started with my water work over the last 20 years and where I've sort of landed. And though this is going to be a very, very quick overview, I just want you to give a sense of that trajectory today of the work overall as opposed to focusing on single projects. So as we know that 263 million people are are still walking or waiting at least 30 minutes to get kind of safe water. How exactly safe, we don't know, but kind of safe water. And at least 150 million people are collecting water from actually known to be unsafe sources to which they actually have to still walk. This is a much smaller number than it used to be in 1990, but I think we can all agree that it is still a little too large for being comfortable about the sustainable development efforts of the global community having reached its potential. It certainly has not yet. So my very first post-PhD project was actually a rainwater harvesting project in Alwar, Rajasthan. And I learned a lot about how people use water and kind of have to manage their lives around the availability of water sources when water is in short supply. So I really came to understand the way in which the availability of water could set the rhythm of community life in both rural places as well as under-resourced urban places. And I came to see water as something that is far bigger than health and livelihoods, but really a critical part of dignity and a life well lived. Much of my later work has really focused on how sort of unsafe type of water sources could be made more safe by home water treatment and storage. There are many, many technologies out there for home water treatment and storage, many of which have proved to be extremely efficacious in the field. But as my colleagues know, and as David Levine himself has worked on in many cases, we find that safe water access, you can do this through chlorination. It's super, super cheap, probably one of the cheapest lifesavers known to humanity. You can boil water, which has its problems if you're using biomass to heat the water inside closed kitchens. You can use UV systems, which actually need a little bit of electricity, so not everybody is going to be qualified to have systems like that. But there are many systems available that people have worked on throughout the world, including in UC Berkeley, that are known to make home water systems much safer, even if the original water source, drinking water source, was not safe, as in had too much fecal contamination, which is the contaminant that we're most concerned about, because it's rampant, it's acute, even though it is not, of course, the only contaminant in water sources. But it's the most common, particularly in rural sources. So what we have learned about safe water is that I'm sharing now my views. This is what I have learned in the course of my 21 years. I'm not going to argue that everybody is going to immediately fall upon these lessons and agree with them. Okay, I'm prepared to take questions, obviously. I found that low-income people really do want and need modest amounts of clean water. It is not that they don't value it or they don't understand its need. I do not feel that my experience has taught me that at all. But it's extremely hard for them to actually pay for what they want to use, and what they do pay for or can pay for, they don't like to use. So for example, chlorine tablets, which practically everybody can afford, are generally disliked when there is any other source available, any other possibility available, right? For example, filters or UV systems, which people actually do like to use, are often very unaffordable for families at the lowest income levels. So we have a kind of a mismatch between what people can afford to use and what they actually have a preference for. And if they don't have a preference for it, they don't want to use it consistently and correctly. You know, in which case you're kind of losing the benefits of having any kind of treatment at all. So I've seen this very commonly. One of the ways in which we as scholars have often referred to this problem is that behavior change is hard. Because all the time you have to pop chlorine into water, right? All the time you have to see that the UV system is working, and you've got a clean canister of water, a clean gallon of water beneath the UV system, right? It's a daily activity, right? And so sometimes we've said, behavior change is very hard. We say this commonly in the development business. But what I want to explain today is, I have stopped using that term. I have stopped using that expression. I have stopped using that expression because when you're really, really poor, every damn thing is hard. Everything is hard, nothing is not hard. Right? Your children are sick. You don't know if they can go to school. You don't know if you can replace your leaking roof. You don't know if your buffalo is going to make it. You don't know if your husband's going to get a job. You don't know if your wife's contract. I mean, everything is hard. Why should we not anticipate that behavior change, quote unquote, around safe water is going to not be hard and not going to be yet another little burden in a life absolutely riddled with burdens, small and large. Right? We have no right, I think, to say behavior change is hard. Point one thing to me that is not hard in those circumstances. And so universal access to safe water, I have come to believe, is only possible when it is able to be accessed as a service and not as a product. Right now, safe water is the product. Overwhelmingly so, unless there is piped disinfected water coming to your home, which is not the case in rural area. So, my feeling is, it's very hard to finance utilities and communities to expand clean water, or even safe rainwater systems where pipes can't go, or delivery systems, or to maintain community-based water systems, which I'm sure RISHI has seen as many challenges. But in my experience, that service model is really the only ever basic model that has gone to scale for all thus far. And therefore, I feel strongly that has to remain the long-term goal, and we have to invest in that long-term goal. So let us invest in services or interim options that are on the pathway to that service model, as opposed to not being on that pathway to the service model. And to quote my late lamented beloved colleague, Kirk Smith, in his words, he used to say, make the clean available. Don't try to make the available clean. And that's as well put as I have ever come across. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. RISHI. That was a wonderful presentation. Next, please welcome Mr. George Scharfenberger, who will speak on his experiences as a practitioner. Please welcome George.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and honored to be with this particular panel. Folks I've been working with since I've come to Berkeley, some of them less long term. How many of you make a wish on your birthday? Okay. So for the last 14 years, I would say, I've had a consistent wish for my birthday. And that is that I don't follow RISHI Ray on a panel. Thank you, Project RISHI. You can't come to my next birthday party. All right, so like Isha, this has forced me to look back. In my case, quite a bit longer than Dr. Ray. But it's actually something I've been doing since I've come to Berkeley. It's one of the reasons why I came to Berkeley. I had a long, if not illustrious, career in development practice, if you would. Probably something close to 30 plus years before coming to Berkeley. And one of the reasons I came here was to reflect on that. Part of it was around a dissatisfaction with what I've seen and what I even myself have done. So there's a lot wrong with this picture. This is my first involvement in clean water. Dare I say this? 50 years ago? You can believe that, I'm sure. Some of you are saying probably 70 years ago. So I started with great hope and naivete as a Peace Corps volunteer in the early 70s. I spent 2 years in a small village in West Africa. And then very importantly, I spent a year in a Senegalese bureaucracy. Probably the most painful, but one of the most important years I've ever spent. Understanding how things work in a different bureaucracy, in a different kind of context. So I got both the kind of the bureaucratic culture as well as the local community culture. And that together, I think, has stood me in good stead over the last 50 years. Certainly, you know, there's an implied arrogance as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, I guess, white American from middle-class California to go to a small African village pretending that I had something to offer them. But also, I think I managed, because of my ability to laugh at myself, to see the errors of my ways, and believe me, there were lots of errors of my ways and lots of to laugh about. And a tremendously open and engaged community that was willing to learn from me and teach me along the way, and probably more of the latter than the former. But I think we actually got some very good things done. It also gave me, I said, this long-term presence. This is a community which I've gone back to for the last 50 years. Last time I was back was 3 years ago. So I've watched the evolution of this community over 50 years as well, which has just been fascinating. And have the relationships then to have people talk about that experience. So I think it's given me some very good insights. All right. After that, 23 years of practice, kind of all over. I did my graduate school, a program similar to the one I managed here at the University of Sussex. I spent my summer practicum, some of you do your summers away, in Africa, working on a technical assistance role. So I've been all of those things in all of those sectors in 20 plus countries. And I won't go into all the details, but I think that has given me a tremendous opportunity to observe, to learn, to be aghast, but also to feel some great, great optimism, largely from the people I've met. My greatest teachers were people like a woman at a well in Burkina Faso, who taught me about her aspirations for her children. About a woman in Bangladesh, who was one of the only pump mechanics the country at that point had ever seen, who talked about her struggle and her determination in spite of the attitudes about her sex and what she was doing to make a difference in her community and her world. And now my students. I get so much from them, and I learn so much from them. It's really been a very much important part of my practice. So there they are. I started out here at Berkeley 15 years ago with the Blum Center. I did that for 2 years. I worked for the Office of Vice Chancellor for Research, looking at international development organizations, and for the last just about 10 years, have had the incredible pleasure to work with 200 plus master's students in the Masters of Development Practice program, through which I have not only gotten to know them, but know some fantastic people like these three in front of you and several others in the audience, and learn from them and their perspectives as academics, challenging my experiences as a practitioner. I think it's that combination, of academic rigor and understanding with those of the best kind of practice, starting from the field, that has made my life, and I think the NDP, such an incredible program. So, I've learned a couple things, like you said. I say develop is a reflexive verb. What do I mean by that? Is one does not develop someone. That person, that community, that nation develops itself. That's the first and foremost thing I think you have to start with. That said, outsiders, from students to PhDs to international organizations, do have something to offer. They have different perspectives. They can pollinate. They have the capacity and privilege of traveling and can share ideas. They can provide hope. They can provide support. They can provide shields in many cases where people can't do things because they're under pressure. Sustainability, the subject of this gathering, is very much significant, critical. But from my experience, it's not the technical issues, it's not the technologies. Yes, there's problems of things not working in a certain environment. There's problems in maintenance and all the rest. But in many cases, it's the more soft parts of sustainability that create problems in the long run. Things like the business model, buy-in, local organizational issues. And just particularly the way it fits into what people's actual diseases are. I worked on my first improved cook stove project in 1976. We're still doing cook stove projects at Berkeley in 2021. How many years is that? Quite a few. Why have those projects not worked? Well, there's a lot of reasons. But I think part of it is because we focus too much on the technology and not enough on the people.
By the way, George, I finally solved that one.
You'll get your turn. I've learned this particularly, I've learned actually from colleagues here, Sarah Beckman and others, that understanding the full system and seeing things in its context, in the larger context of the forces that make things happen and not happen, is critically important, and it's not going on too long. So context matters. And ultimately, it's important to understand history. Absolutely. Critical to understand what went before you. Things did not start today with you going out or whatever has happened. There's a long history of why things are the way they are. But at the same time, history is not totally determined the opportunities for the future. I mean, to say that, I think would really deny the agency of people to make things different. And so that power about that respect for where things came from, but the optimism to change things, despite, or maybe in some ways by using some of that background, is definitely there. And finally, thank you, Isha, for reminding me, in this business, it's good to be a little angry. Angry about injustice. Angry about unfairness. Angry about inequality. It's those things that help, I think, motivate all of us when things get tough. So cultivate just a little bit of anger, because it also can be a deadly poison if it becomes too much to rule your emotions. But it's very important. So I'll just leave this. This is one of my, so I've talked to all these incredible people around the world in my life. This is Amadou Bari. Probably, this was quite a few years ago, but he was an elder in Timbuktu. I was doing a focus group on a telecenter that we were parachuting into Timbuktu, literally Timbuktu. And it brings up to me the question of voice. And whose story is this all about? And the story of Timbuktu, he said, has been told by people who look like you for the last 100 years. Ever since you people came in and took this land away from us. But somehow the internet now, he felt, for this first time is allowing them to tell their own story. So I think, to me, the point of this was the degree to which whatever we do allows people to own and to tell their own story is what sustainability is all about. Thank you very much.
That was Dr. Scharfenberger, who is the Managing Director at UC Berkeley's Master Development Practice, and also part of the Boehm Center for Developing Economies as a lecturer. Next, we welcome Dr. Clara Nichols, who is a permanent lecturer at UC Berkeley, focusing on sustainable rural development and agroecology. She has also held the presidency at the Latin American Scientific Society of Agroecology. Please welcome Dr. Nichols.
Because I don't want to read through there. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And I wanted to share my career and my inspiration. That I'm from Colombia. I'm an agronomist, an entomologist, and I work here 6 months, and the rest of the year I spend in Colombia working with the small farms. So I'm going to share with you how we work with them and how we learn and discuss and try to work in a way we can find the objectives that we want in sustainable development. So first of all, I want to, sustainable development is just objectives that with the science of agroecology, that is a holistic science that integrates traditional farming systems and knowledge, mobilizing the local know-how. I agree with George that it's very important, the knowledge that they have, and also the resources that they have, with a collective action to achieve food sovereignty, that's the most important goal of sustainable development, and natural resource and biodiversity conservation. So for that reason, it's very important to understand how we can learn here in the university, in the Western science, and how we can combine that knowledge with farmers at the same level, because it's another way how they perceive nature. And agroecology is that science that works with principles that take technological forms. Accordingly, we are working with small farmers, with medium-sized farmers, even big farmers. But the most important thing in terms of research is the participatory research, because we need to set up the agenda of the research with them, for them, and work, and they can be our co-investigators. They can be even at the same level that we are. And for that, we use very simple methodologies and very simple indicators that I want to share with you. The principles of agroecology are very simple. It's based on ecology, and for that reason, we maintain the species and genetic diversification at the field and landscape level. We promote the recycling of biomass and different balance of nutrient flows, very important. Also, we want to secure favorable conditions for soil, increasing the organic matter content and soil biology. And we enhance biological interaction and system between different components. But it's very important, the social process, because even all of these principles are mainly ecological, but the social processes are very important. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that we need to work with them in setting the agenda, because participatory rural diagnosis and search for the agroecological solution is very important, because sometimes we think here in the university that we have all the solutions. We are in a bubble, because many solutions are there, and we need to find the solution with them. So for that, agroecology has different strategies. Start with ensure the food sovereignty first of the local communities, and instead of using inputs, we use ecological processes. For that, we enhance biological control of insect pests. I'm an entomologist, so this was my first initial work as a researcher. But later, I learned so many things from them. The importance of soil and water conservation. In the scenario of climate change, this is very, very important. Different strategies for plant production, animal production, organic fertilizers, and other resources, local resources that the farmers have are part of these strategies. And also, when we have working with them in the scenario of climate change, I'm a coordinator of one network in Latin America with more than 20 scientists and many students. And so it's very important to have very simple methodology that students and also professors and farmers and young people can participate in the research. So for that, we do participatory assessments of resiliency using, for example, this facial iconography. This is in Oaxaca, in Mexico, where we are using, for example, happy faces. The sad or the red sad face means that the system is very vulnerable. We use different indicators at the landscape level, at the farm level, and the quality of soil and or water conservation level. And the normal phase is more acceptable system, and the happy phase, it means that the system is resilient. And obviously, we have to do another kind of evaluation for our papers. But I think the most important thing is that farmers can participate. You can see the faces here, and it's very ludic, because the children can participate with the women, and they can be empowered on what decision they need to take through campesino campesino, that is how they share the knowledge. So in agroecology, and I think with that, I'm going to end my talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nichols. And last but not least, we would like to present Dr. David I. Levine, who is a professor at the Haas School of Business and the Eugene E. Catherine M. Trefton Chair in Business Administration, as well as the Chair of Economic Analysis and Policy Group. He has conducted extensive research in health promoting practices and has started the nonprofit Hygiene Heroes that designs curricula around preventative health for children around the world. Please welcome Dr. Levine.
So I'll start by saying I'm here under false pretenses. I don't know how to create sustainable practices. And that's kind of depressing, but it's also kind of exciting because I do have a set of questions that will lead us there. And they're exactly the ones that my colleagues are talking about. So George talked about, well, you gotta have business models. That this has to be solving a problem for somebody, and that somebody has to be able to pay for it, but the issue is going, well, these people don't have a lot of money, and that's going to be really hard. And what makes it even harder is there have to be a bunch of business models. That if we're trying to sell this water, we need to think about, there's supply and demand for a consumer, but he's just saying, well, point of use water treatment, the stuff she and I have worked on, water filters and chlorine, it doesn't have very high uptake. We got to get piped water, so now we need a business model for the consumers. But the consumer is ill-defined because the women are the ones doing that water gathering, and in most of these places, most of the places, women are water gathering, and men are the ones who control most of the money. So now we have complicated business models within the household. We have to solve problems for women and for men. And we have to, if we're trying to get in the pipe system, that gets back to the Senegalese bureaucracy. We have a whole bunch of other layers that this has to be solving a problem for. So this is just to say that, we have to go to each part of the decision chain, every stakeholder, and make sure we're solving a problem for them. And I can say I don't know how to do that and be telling the truth, but the toolkit we can give you is this list of questions. Figure out who would say no to this and make sure you're solving a problem for each of them. And that's the business model George talked about. And then, how do you know you're solving a problem for them? And this is, again, what everyone here has spoken about. I don't know, but I have a bunch of things I can teach you, that Berkeley teaches you, about how you learn. And they're mostly the things folks here were talking about. If you want to know about farmers, you better go talk to a bunch of farmers and work with them. And do observation and interviews and group discussions with these wonderful, the mapping and easy ways for them to teach us. And be learning about what the problems are in their lives. Because if we're not solving a problem for them, it's not going to work. And so I encourage everybody to take a lot of courses in how to do observation, interviews, surveys, run experiments. And then we have to come up with solutions. And I don't know anything about farming or combustion or anything. So again, as I think everybody, especially Heather was talking about, they know a lot more about solutions than I ever will. So make sure you're learning from them. As George says, maybe I can teach them, but definitely they can teach me. And that's, every school child and teacher and, person living in a village is my teacher. They all know stuff that I don't in endless, boundless levels. And so take all of our tools to help develop solutions with them. Because we do know stuff they don't know. I mean, I don't, but other people at Berkeley know about combustion or farming or entomology and water treatment and stuff. And we do collectively bring some technical skills. But whatever we come up with will suck. It won't work. And just embrace the fact that whatever smart people at Berkeley, even participating with the farmers or the the water experts or the whatever, it's not going to be good enough. And once again, we have this toolkit. So we go back to observing, interviewing, doing surveys, doing experiments, and just the humility that everyone did. But George said, he went with good humor and a lot of willingness to learn. Just embrace that we can't possibly design a solution that's sustainable, that it's going to be something that'll last. But maybe we can if we're willing to spend enough years looking at our brilliant ideas flop, figuring out what we did wrong, working with the folks there to improve them. So, I'll just tell a couple stories from my own experience. Go ahead, a few minutes. I designed a hand washing curriculum. I was very proud. It had stories and activities. It was really great. And it worked when Berkeley students or my excellent interns from IIT Madras and Elite University were teaching the kids. And then I thought, boy, am I ever stupid. Because I hadn't thought about whether it was solving problems for teachers. So the next year we went back and made a version that the teachers liked, and it still worked not quite as well. And I was pretty excited, and I thought, yeah, but I haven't solved the problem for the school system. And then we had to go back and work some more. And now, in principle, they're going to do our COVID prevention for 37,000 schools. But I don't think we really spent enough time solving problems for the school system because they haven't met with me in months, even though they say they're going to disseminate this curriculum. So I'm still not there at something that can go to scale after a lot of years. Even though it works great when it's supposed to. That the kids will wash hands and the teachers will follow it, but I haven't solved the problem for everyone in that line of decision makers. I hope I have. They've told me they're going to do it, but they just reopened schools last week and they haven't asked us to train teachers yet, so we're not super confident. In principle, we'll be doing it next few weeks, but that was true 2 months ago. What I want to emphasize is just repeating the main themes you've heard. You have to have a business model. It may not be a business model if it's for a bureaucrat or for a woman who doesn't manage any money, but it has to be solving a problem for her or him, for each stakeholder. That we don't understand the problem. I grew up in the Bay Area. I'm particularly ignorant, but even folks who, spend soccer time in the farms, we don't understand the problems deeply enough. And so we have to use all of the research methods we teach here at Berkeley about observation and listening and surveys, experiments, and stuff. We can't come up with solutions here, but again, we bring a bunch of, this is not me, but engineering and biology parts bring a lot of technical knowledge, but we still need to work with the communities to figure out what might be a tenable product. And then just embrace the fact that your product will suck. And just consider everything the rough draft for a long time. And go back to that list of research methods. And keep having all of these communities be our teachers. And nothing was more exciting. We're working on a sexual reproductive health curriculum as part of this. Son is leading that. And, it took a long time for it to negotiate, but we got a video of some women teaching other women, a couple of our most controversial units. I thought they'd start with menstrual health. They dove right into spousal abuse and homosexuality, the 2 units I would put at the end. And, it was very exciting. They worked okay. And seeing all the things that didn't work that well. And just for me to take this as an exciting opportunity to improve, not like, oh, darn, that really didn't go the way I intended. Which, of course, it didn't. But that's exciting way to learn. And my last line, I want to compliment something that George said. He said it's important to have a little bit of anger. And I want you to remember that, and I also want you to remember, I started working on the health of poor kids in poor countries because I thought, sort of my logical brain, that was the highest value use of my time. And then I realized that I love the children. Not like each individual creep in some creepy way, but just And I do try to start each day remembering that I love the children. But when COVID hit, I realized I love the grandparents too. I hadn't even focused on that. So it was a compliment, in no way disagreeing with what George said or the, passion which Isha spoke. I encourage you, maybe it'll work for you the way it does for me. Spend a minute to think about the love of you all, as well as, that love can motivate a lot of other emotions, like anger. And do remember that. Maybe it'll help you stay focused on solving these most important problems. So, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levine. And thank you all for listening. Because it is 11, we do want to move on to the live Q&A section. So the way this will work is if you have a question, just raise your hand and the mic will be passed to you. And if it's a general question, just make that clear. If it's a specific question, then one of our panelists will respond. So yeah, does anyone want to start us off? Yeah, Justin.
I can also just speak. You all talked about how COVID has maybe changed the challenges or changed the potential solutions to all of your work. And I'm wondering, everybody touched on engaging with local stakeholders. How is it in the long term changed now that you haven't been able to, maybe have face-to-face interaction or go actually and have physical, even physical touch? Is there something that is now, for the years to come, changed forever with the pandemic in all of your work? And this is for anyone.
I guess I can start off by saying I hope so. I think what we've learned over the last 2 years, this is largely talking to my colleagues who are really working in the development space, is that to somewhat great surprise, and surprising that it was surprise, folks are kind of keeping on. They really don't need thousands of people flying in from Washington and London and Paris and wherever else. That there are ways through, we certainly have the advantage now, as we've all learned, hate it or whatever, Zoom and other kind of electronics to speak to people. And those are getting surprisingly far down, through WhatsApp and others, getting pretty far out there. But the other thing is what this is forced, and I think folks like Claire, I think were ahead of this long ago, is it really comes down to local partnerships. They're the ones I think that we can most effectively support, but they're the ones who really, I think, are closest to the ground and ability and able to keep things going. And I think we learned that they're much more up to the task than maybe we assumed that they were. So yes, I hope that things have changed, and I think in a positive way.
Yes, I want to comment because I think it's important that we reflect about the pandemic. And I think in the case of agriculture, the pandemic demonstrated how fragile is the food system that we have, the conventional food system that we have. And the lockouts of many cities, and also what are the root causes of this pandemic. I think it's very important. It's the industrial agricultural system that we have. The deforestation that, create the habitat for these viruses to move to the animals and from the animals to humans is very important to realize, to understand that system was the cause of the COVID. And more pandemics are coming if we don't transform the food system. And this is the first lesson that I think it is important that we talk about that. And I think the other lesson or opportunity is to know where the food is coming from. Because the food that we eat every day are coming from the small farmers, not from industrial agriculture. Small farmers produce 50 to 70% of the food that we eat, but they only have 10% of the land, 20% of the water, and 30% of the fossil fuel. So climate change is the same. Industrial agriculture is one of the major producers of gas emissions. And I presented the example of silvopastoral system, the alternative animal production, because many people are blaming on on animals. But we need to understand what kind of system is the one that are causing the problem. Because when you have, when you deforested and you have all this big monoculture of soybean, for example, in Latin America, it's very easy that the virus enter into the cathodes of the confined animals and transmitted that to humans. But when you have animals in silvopastoral systems, their animals are in a better welfare, they don't use antibiotics, so it's very difficult that we have those problems. And the other thing is that we as a consumer, I think, we need to support the small farmers that are producing our food. And also because they were there working. I don't know here, but in Latin America, they were the only ones who were outside producing food for everybody. So I think these are elements that we need to bring to the discussion and could be an opportunity to transform the food system, because we don't want more pandemic, we don't want more climate change affecting the small farmers, so we need to take the opportunity to demonstrate what are the root causes, but also what are the solutions.
Just for myself, we were almost done collecting data on a randomized trial of our hand-washing intervention in schools, got cut short by COVID. It motivated us to create a COVID prevention, which obviously hand-washing is part of. And then the school system was thought they were maybe going to do the hand-washing at scale. They're more likely to do the COVID prevention, although, as I said, I'm not sure of that. So it's created this, the tragedy gives room for an opportunity to try to make it not quite as bad. But I'm 60 and I'm not going to India next year, and I didn't go the last 2 years, and that's very sad for me because I have so much to learn. I have all my different, a billion plus teachers that I can only talk to remotely. But it's exciting to see, as George was saying, to work with the partners overseas and learn from them remotely as best we can. And there are, as I said, watching videos from the NGO teaching last week was very exciting, even if it would have probably gone faster without COVID. So it's slowed down a lot of work. It's created new opportunities to try to be useful. And personally, it's frustrating because the travel is a valuable part of what I like to do.
I can just my question is for Dr. Ryder and anyone else who speak on it. You had mentioned that when talking about rural people's wants and needs, there's often a mismatch between what they prefer versus what's available to them or what they can afford. Would you be able to speak on any specific instances in your work where you had to balance this mismatch?
Specific instances where I had to?
Balance the mismatch.
So I'm not, since I'm mainly like a researcher, right? It's not, I don't really directly implement solutions, right? Sorry. Thank you. So, thank you. So I'm not implementing solutions, so I don't really usually have the opportunity to directly balance. I'm not an NGO. I can, of course, speak to NGOs or local governments or whoever are interested in the results of our work and give them our best guidance or best opinions. As kind of the way I see us as we act as honest brokers between the community and the responsible parties in the local context. But I have not taken on myself the role of, what am I going to implement and how am I going to balance, because I don't think that's the way in which the kind of research we can do can flourish. That being said, I think that it's been very important for me to understand why there is the mismatch. And when we ask ourselves the question, what is going to work in this community for the people most in need? Where are the greatest risks? What might work in this community most sustainably? And I very much agree that those questions can only be addressed in a participatory manner. We cannot from outside. you often get a very different answer than if you lead with the question, what can these people afford? How much is the user going to have to pay? Because here's the limit of, state subsidization or government help or NGO help or whatever. So if you lead with the question, what can they pay for? You don't necessarily get the same answer as, what can they sustainably use? And I think in the development space, we very often lead with the question, what can they pay for, implicitly, even if not explicitly. So, yeah, and I think that that's just something I feel the need to push back against, especially when it comes to things which are like basic human rights, like safe water.
I had a question for Dr. Ray as well, and I was wondering if you could speak more to how the process of turning or developing water into a service and not a product is being impacted by water becoming more of a scarcity with climate change, and how that's kind of impacted just the process of developing water services.
So little water is needed for domestic purposes, 8 to 9% of the global use of fresh water, that I don't see climate change as being a genuine obstacle to being able to provide safe water in modest quantities, not to what a rose garden maybe, but in modest quantities for most homes. I'd like to point out that while climate change exacerbates everything, nobody can think of anything that's actually made better. While climate change exacerbates everything, the problem of water injustice is a very old problem. It did not arise with climate change. And so I don't want it to be always subsumed under the climate change problem. The climate change issue is, the environmental and political issue of our time. I would never deny that. It's an existential issue for us. But these problems and these injustices and these payment issues and these technical, appropriate technology or practical technology issues really very much precede the climate change crisis. So I don't like to think of them as inextricably linked.
Thank you.
So you all kind of spoke about implementing long-term sustainable change. I was wondering, how do you balance that with the urgency for short-term solutions? Because as we've seen with the pandemic, there are these very quick and immediate needs that do pop up. So how do we balance that with long-term sustainable development and change?
I would maybe talk to a couple of examples from my past. I was tangentially involved in immediate repairs after civil war in Sierra Leone. Sorry, in Liberia, and the immediate, great international mobilization, bringing in all sorts of construction to rebuild cities and infrastructure and all the rest. All built by international labor and technologies coming in from the outside. A lot of the local craftsmen and construction companies and stuff had closed down and had left the country and whatever. So there was a need, definitely. But I do believe that there could have been a better balance of hiring bringing in more local firms, identifying the diaspora who had left and bringing them back in a way that would have set the country up for much more sustainable growth following that. So this kind of emergency development nexus, people have talked for years about how the two have to work better together. I can remember a conference in the late 90s where people were talking about that, and everyone said, yes, these two communities need to talk to each other, but they never really have. So I think that, that they're, when you're literally saving lives, I think that's got to be the first thing. But with pre-planning, I think in a lot of cases, scenario planning, what would we do if? I think we do a lot better to respond in a way that sets the framework for sustainable development by building local capacity, by investing in local skills, I think that there's a lot more that could be done. And I think that the development agencies are beginning to think, the humanitarian agencies are beginning to think about that.
Yeah, I think your question is very important in the sense that we need to, sometimes when we work with communities, we are there, for a long time. So our projects are 3-5 years at the most. And for that reason, it's very important from the time zero to start working and empowering the people. And not only bringing the technology, because this is not at least in my research, is not bring technology, it's work together to find a solution. And I don't want to romanticize also traditional knowledge, because not all of them have the knowledge how to do it, the solution. But I think the science of agroecology provides the principles how to design, to evaluate, to design the farm together. But empowerment is very important, because they need to understand the root causes of any problem. It could be the bug, could be the insect that is a problem. They need to understand why do they have the insect now. It's probably because they don't have natural enemies, because they are applying pesticides, because several reasons, but they need to understand why. When they understand why, they decide how they are going to improve the beneficiaries. And the other thing that is important is not only the pests, but they need to understand the root causes of the socioeconomic problem that they have, environmentally speaking, and also economically speaking. They need to know why they are so poor, why is so much food injustice, for example. And then this is very important to empower them, to get organized, to demand certain policies. This is how I learned in Colombia and in Brazil. Social movements are so important because now they are taking agroecology as a flag of rural development, so they can push for the policy that they need. And we are outsiders. So we were there for 4 or 5 years, and then now they are the ones who are doing the things. And they have leaders, and they have the methodology of campesino that is flourishing in Latin America, and they have their own organization, and we are like facilitators of that process. So I think in the long term, this is what we need. And I know that most of the policies are totally against small farmers. Totally against, because the status quo, the neoliberal policies are destroying the agriculture all over, are benefiting only the industrial agriculture. And I think when farmers understand those issues, and young people understand, especially sons and daughters of farmers, understand those issues, they can go and study and come back and fight for their territory. So the territory issue is very important, because sustainable development crystallizes at the local level, with cultural identity, and also with all these objectives that they decide what are the objectives. We have certain ideas, but I think the empowerment is a key for long-term sustainable development.
Can I just add, go ahead. Just the one point I forgot to make is this concept of resiliency, depending on how you decide. And if you go about anything you do with a resilience mindset, i.e., what might happen, what are the shocks that might affect this, from a technology point of view, from a social point of view, and whatever, I think that helps build at least a bit of resistance, so you don't have to have those trade-offs between emergency and long-term development. Sorry.
I'll just give like my plug for a science fiction story, which is to take the scenario planning that George describes seriously. Clara told us there's going to be another pandemic, and unfortunately she's completely correct. And we don't know what it's going to be, but we know how it's going to spread. It's either the air or the water or hands or sex, or there's only a few ways in bugs. There's only a few ways to be spread. So what we should be doing now is working around the world with different communities. I would have said behavior change is hard. Alicia corrects me, everything is hard. And figure out if we need to address mosquitoes or touching dead bodies or whatever, it means different parts of the world. How are we going to, if that becomes the way to end a pandemic, how are we going to do that? And so, once the pandemic hits, the skills that the researchers bring are too late, we're too slow. But we can do the scenario planning and figure out, ahead of time, working with communities, how do you fight mosquitoes in one of the tall white men?
That's embarrassing.
No, sorry, I've got all right, I'm actually a White Savior, a charter member of White Savior Anonymous. So, yeah, no, I think that you saw, I mean, I was a White Savior. That's perhaps age appropriate in that age, but not so much today. But one thing I think that we have to keep in mind is how clever communities around the world are. And they see us coming a mile away, and they're calculating, okay, here comes this tall white boy. He thinks he's going to save us, but let's get together and see what we can get out of him. I mean, there's much more agency in that relationship than we like to believe. So that doesn't excuse it, but I think in some ways, they get out of it kind of what they're able to get much more than we might think so. That said, I mean, I think over the last 50 years, there has been an incredible change in both official development assistance and NGOs, much more sophistication, much more use of kind of more rigorous understanding of kind of what works, evidence-based, the need to come back on results. So I think that there's certainly that things have gotten better. There's certainly kind of more kind of smaller fringer groups that kind of go off and do their own thing. But by and large, I think that's less of an issue. I think the way you get about that then too is getting back to what I think all of us have said, is that understanding that it's not about you. You're not the developer. They are the developer. This is their lives. And if you go in and are willing to honestly engage, to listen, to develop relationships, and ultimately to respect who they are, what they have, start with them and their aspirations, start with them and their understanding of what their problems are, what they want to do, what they want their children's lives to be, and build out from that with whatever you can contribute to it. I think there's much less danger of that.
Thank you. With this question, I'd like to come back from other communities and other countries here to the US and to this community and to this state. And I got a very general question. So I'm sure that's not the focus of your research, but I'm sure you got your observations. So do you think that Americans are committed to sustainable development? Do they understand that? Do they have a coherent vision on sustainability, on sustainable development? Do they think that that should be their everyday practice, from your observations? Thank you.
I'll answer for the group, no. Next question? That's somebody want to answer.
I can answer that question because this is part of I can answer that question because I teach sustainable rural development in Latin America, and that kind of discussion we have with my students, because all of them are Americans. I'm the only one who are foreign. But I think it's very important that the students understand what are the objectives of sustainable development, not only far away from here, but also here. What they, as a student, can help to change the policies that are implemented here, that are translated to our countries. And I think this is the most important point, because most of the policies that I'm talking about, several policies on agriculture, were born here. And Green Revolution, for example, they thought that with Green Revolution there was they are going to solve the problem of hunger in the third world, and after 60 years of the revolution, 50 years of the revolution, we haven't solved the problem, and probably because at that time they didn't realize that the farmers have a lot of knowledge, and they didn't want to hear. So I think this is very important to understand how the policies that are created here affect the rural poor or in the global south, and also what you can do as a citizens here, because it depends. In Washington, there are so many lobby of the big industry to maintain the industrial agriculture, the subsidies, and they don't care if they dump their corn in Mexico and in the center of origin of corn, and farmers farmers have to migrate to the United States because they cannot live there. So I think those things is the one that we need to understand. What we can do to avoid migration. It's not just to build a wall. We need to understand why the small farmers from Mexico are migrating here. And it's because the dumping, it's because the subsidies, it's because the agro-industry that are doing a lot of lobbying in Washington. So what we can do? These are the questions. And also, talking about the objectives, do you think that here we have food sovereignty? There is a lot of food injustice outside this campus. And the students never talk about that. And I think I challenge all the students in my class, what we are going to do with the food injustice that is in Berkeley, that is even in campus. There are so many students that are food insecure, and many people don't know, because I always say we are in a bubble. I'm sorry, I'm from Colombia, and the way I was studying at the university was totally different. We were confronting the professor, we were confronting the system. Here the students are so, I don't know, I want to like, okay.
Can we turn her mic off?
No, I think it's important. I think this kind of discussion that we need to have in the classroom. Because you stay here for years and then you go and find a job and you don't have the opportunity to talk with other people. So I think this is I thank you for your question, because it's so important to talk about what happened here, because sometimes we think that it's down there in Africa, in India, or in Colombia, or in Mexico, that we are okay here. No, the situation here, they have the same problem that we are facing. 219 farmers of this country get out of business every day in this country. So you can imagine what happened in Latin America.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say three data points. Number one, do we know that this is a number that dates back about 5 years, but that something close to 40% of UC Berkeley students report some level of food insecurity in one of these surveys, 40%, 40. Secondly, I can't quote the study, but the United States ranked far behind all the rest of the OECD countries in terms of just questions about knowledge of the existence of the STD, and that's what they mean. But more hopefully, I would say that somewhere more than 1/3 of the students taking a Master's of Development Practice program, graduate students, which was originally set up focused internationally, are much more interested in working domestically on sustainability issues. So you're the solution to the problem you're defining.
We have time for one more question. So, yeah, do you want to pass the mic there?
Hi, so I have actually kind of a follow-up question to hers, which is, what do you think is the best way, not in a rural sense, but like local communities, to help change people's habits, kind of the user behavior change, to kind of get them more on a sustainable track? I mean, people are kind of aware of it, like recycling or like reusing. But what do you think is a good way to reach out to them, to make them make the change? And sorry, it's like a second question as well, but what's your take on carbon footprint?
If we have time for just one question, I'll just address the first
First
one.
question.
And I just want to go back to what everybody here said. That's a great question, and we couldn't possibly sit here and tell you an answer. You've got to go study. So I'm totally proud of myself. I remembered my water model today. I get to feel so self-righteous. I'm not using that one. But I usually forget it. And so you have to go down, even if somebody already believes, what are the barriers? Do I need a separate water bottle that lives in my car, my backpack? Do I need reminders? For me, it's never going to be a barrier of cost, but obviously, as Isha was emphasizing, everything's hard when you're desperately poor. And the cognitive load that she was describing, when your kids could be sick, or your ox could be sick, or your person who owes you money could be sick, it's just, helping. You have to go to that context and work in the community using all the tools, participatory design, and I listed surveys, observation, interviews, experiments, understand the barriers. But even though it's a great question, the only answer I could give you, and I think the panel would agree, is we couldn't possibly answer without knowing recycling where. Because the relevant barriers, I could list 40 barriers, and I wouldn't know which ones are most important, and that list would be wrong. I mean, I have, for most of my projects, I have like pages and pages of barriers, and then you go out in the field, and there are new ways to fail. And so as long as I think I'm a researcher, this is fun, that's kind of exciting. When I'm trying to heal the world, it's kind of depressing. But we're always learning new things that go wrong. So my quick answer is, there is no quick answer. You've got to do the work that everyone here discussed.
So is the mic live? Perfect. I would like to address your question in two ways. One, thus far we have been speaking as if communities are somehow isolated from the broader political economy in which they're embedded. But they're actually not isolated from the broader political economy in which they're embedded. And therefore, I think that if we really do want to encourage and incentivize sustainable behavior, health behaviors, we have to think about the broader political environment which is setting incentives, setting prices, setting regulations, and so on, and not expecting the communities themselves, in spite of all odds, enormous odds, to be incentivized to recycle a few Coca-Cola cans. That's not going to actually take us out of the situation where we're in now. The second thing I would like to bring up is picking up on David Levine's point of the cognitive overload. These things, behavior change is not an expression I love anymore, but this sort of how can we encourage communities to participate in activities that are actually beneficial for them as well as the broader environment. The easier we make it, the more likely it is to be undertaken. The more incentive compatible we make it, the more likely it is to be undertaken. The more it acts like one more cognitive load, right, the less it is likely to be undertaken. And that is actually what has brought me to my conclusion that in terms of basic human rights, when you think about water, not everything is a basic human right, but some of these things that are not made into service orientation as a delivery model, product orientation, or a business model as a model, it's going to be harder for us to actually achieve that universal access. Things are already too much at the lowest quintiles. Things are already too much. We can't educate them into one more responsibility. I feel like we should, at the heart of this is saying in university, we have an unshakable faith in data, evidence, and education that we probably should be a little bit more humble about.
Thank you. We want to finish this up with a big round of applause and thank you for amazing panelists.